Good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to welcome you to the second half of our annual land use training program for municipal planning and zoning officials. My name is Ashira Ostrow, and I am the Executive Director of the Breslin Center for Real Estate Studies here at Hofstra. So before we begin, I just want to go over a couple of details for the program. First off, the confirmation email that you received with the Zoom link also includes a link to a Dropbox, and that Dropbox contains the materials and all the presentations from today's program. Attendance at this program satisfies New York State's annual continuing education requirement for municipal planning and zoning officials. In addition, certification maintenance credits for American Institute certified planners have been requested. And our program also provides 2.5 continuing legal education credits for attorneys. Throughout the program, I will announce several attendance verification codes. In order to obtain the CLE credits, you're going to have to provide these codes on your affirmation form. So it's important that you write them down and have them available. The affirmation form itself, as well as an evaluation form, are included in the conference materials. And we ask that you please take a moment to fill out the evaluation form. Your feedback is very important to us. One last thing is that we will have time for discussion at the end of each panel. And so I encourage you to submit your questions through the chat function throughout the program, and we will get to as many as possible. So with that, I am happy to introduce our first panel on community land trusts on Long Island. And we are fortunate to have with us a group of panelists who have been deeply involved in this issue. So I'd first like to introduce Lawrence Levy, who is the Executive Dean of the National Center for Suburban Studies here at Hofstra. As the Executive Dean, Larry works with academic departments throughout the university, as well as with other institutions, not-for-profit groups, government agencies, to promote the study of the suburbs nationwide. Christopher Knight, is an Associate Professor of Applied Social Research in the Department of Sociology, and he is also the Academic Director for the National Center for Suburban Studies. And Chris has worked with Hofstra faculty and local residents to establish the Hempstead and the Uniondale Community Land Trusts. Nicole Burke is the Vice President of the Uniondale Community Land Trust. Nicole is a New York State licensed real estate associate broker. She has over 17 years of experience selling residential real estate in New York. And I'm also proud to say that Nicole is a recent alum, and she received her MBA in real estate from the Czar Business School at Hofstra in 2017. Charlene Thompson serves as the Commissioner of the Village of Hempstead's Community Development Agency. Charlene has spent more than 15 years focused on real estate, housing, and development issues. And she's been instrumental in establishing and overseeing the Hempstead and the Uniondale Community Land Trusts. And our final presenter is Peter Elkowitz, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Long Island Housing Partnership. The Long Island Housing Partnership provides affordable housing opportunities to those who would otherwise be unable to find a decent and safe home. And Peter also serves as the treasurer of the National Community Land Trust Network. And with that, I am going to turn the panel over to Larry, who is going to lead our discussion and interact with all of the panelists.
Thank you, Ashira. It's great that the National Center for Suburban Studies was invited to be part of this. The mission of the center is to advance the goals of suburban sustainability, social equity, economic development through research, education, public outreach, community engagement. And housing has always been one of our sweet spots. Chris Neat is a nationally recognized expert in housing. We've done studies, we've partnered with some of the people on this panel to look at the intersection of housing with health, housing with transportation, housing with education. Anything to do with housing determines who you are, what you eat, how you learn, and whether you get to advance. We're very excited to be part of this discussion. And I'd like to go right to Chris now to talk about what a community land trust is. What explains the surge of interest in CLTs in the last 10 years, and how this fits into the broader need for more affordable and quality housing.
Thanks, Larry. It's a great question. Land trusts the idea has actually been around for a while. They date to the 1960s when the first land trust was created in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. And although the model's been used since then in different cities and towns across the country, it's relatively new to Long Island, but it's becoming more prominent. And the impetus for this panel was really the growth of the Uniondale and Hempstead Community Land Trusts, and also the expansion of the Long Island Housing Partnership and CLT work. So I'm very excited that we have representatives from all of those organizations on our panel today. So to answer your question, what is a community land trust? So at its broadest, as community land trust, or CLT, is created by a nonprofit organization for the purpose of acquiring and stewarding properties for public benefit. And those benefits can include environmental conservation, commercial revitalization, the preservation of affordable rental units. But in this session, we're really focused on the use of CLTs as an affordable housing strategy for owner occupants. I should note here that CLTs are not the same thing as land banks. The two are commonly confused. Land banks are governmental entities that acquire abandoned and tax delinquent properties and then transfer them to responsible owners for rehabilitation and development. Now, sometimes land banks do transfer properties to CLTs, creating a partnership, but the two entities are distinct, they're different. So an affordable housing CLT works by acquiring and renovating existing units or acquiring vacant land for the construction of new units. They then resell those homes to buyers, retaining ownership of the land. CLTs affirmatively market the home just as any other affordable housing provider does, and they sell it to a qualifying low-income home buyer at a below market price. Now, there's an ongoing relationship between the buyer and this CLT, and that relationship is governed usually by a ground lease, or in some cases by a deed restriction, with the homeowner paying the CLT a nominal monthly fee. The lease provides the owners with most of the benefits of standard fee simple home ownership, with a couple important exceptions. So the first exception is that when the homeowner resells the property, when the homeowner leaves the house, their proceeds are limited by a resale formula. And that formula usually allows them to receive the original value of the property, plus partial reimbursement for major property improvements. It also commonly allows the homeowner to receive some market-based appreciation, but less than they would have received if they had just bought and sold the property on the open market. And the goal here is to keep the home, of course, affordable over time for successive purchasers. So the first family buys the home, they receive some appreciation, and when they go to resell, the price has risen a little bit, but hopefully that the benefit of affordable housing gets sustained in the very long term. So that's the first difference. The second difference is that the ground lease often includes some limitations that reflect specific community stabilization and revitalization goals. So I've worked most closely with Uniondale CLT over the last several years. And in the Uniondale CLT's ground lease, there's a yearly occupancy requirement. You have to live in the property for 10 months out of the year. And that really reflects that the CLT was created during the foreclosure crisis when vacancy was a real problem in the area, right? And so Uniondale CLT has now built that occupancy requirement into their ground lease. And the third difference, so the first two differences, the resale formula and some of these lease provisions. And then the third difference is that the formal structure of the ground lease is complemented with an organizational commitment to stewardship. So the CLT maintains a relationship with the homeowner, both to ensure that they adhere to the ground lease and also to provide support in case of economic hardship. That close stewardship relationship is made possible by a CLT board that usually has a tripartite structure. A third of the directors of the board are local residents and neighbors. A third are drawn from the people who actually occupy CLT units, and a third are representatives from the broader public, including area institutions like Hofstra. So these two things together, the organizational form and the ground lease, give the model key advantages over other affordable housing strategies. So by developing a community-based tripartite board, the CLT deepens community engagement. It builds support for affordable housing while also ensuring that the CLT is accountable to its neighbors. The grassroots character really encourages communities to envision how affordable housing can be an asset for them, right? How it can be a resource, and how it can and kind of fits affordable housing into broader efforts, broader kind of democratically based community revitalization efforts. The resale formula specifically has the potential, again, to keep housing affordable for generations, which makes CLTs a more effective use of public funds than models that only provide a limited period for the recapturing of public subsidy. And ultimately, these two elements, the sustained affordability coupled with the stewardship, have kind of proven effects on community stability. So during the subprime crisis, and I'm drawing here from research done by Burlington Associates. During the subprime crisis, we saw serious delinquency rise to 9 to 10% of all owner households across the country, and foreclosures rise to 4 to 5%. And the corresponding rates for CLT homes were 1 to 2% for serious delinquencies and 0.5% for foreclosures. That's a proven track record and shows the effectiveness of CLTs for stabilization. And that stability is why many community leaders turned to CLTs in the 2010s, right? Because the model offers community control, accountability, and security for individual homeowners after a period where all three of those were in short supply, right? When many communities had been destroyed by this crisis and its negative spillover effects. And really, it's for those same reasons, I'll just end here, that I think that CLTs are a promising model as we make our way through this recession and as we try to anticipate and prepare for what's likely to be at least some increase in the number of foreclosed homes and vacant homes in the coming year or two.
Thank you, Chris. So this brings us to Uniondale and Hempstead, which were two of the communities that were hardest hit by the foreclosure and vacancies. So Nicole, working as a real estate agent, you saw the effects of these crises firsthand. Could you talk a little bit about your experiences and about the Uniondale CLT's work in particular to address the vacancy problem?
I can. Thank you, Larry. May I share my story with you? Just my personal story?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to take you back to 2006, where I was newly fresh a real estate agent in the market. Mortgages were being lent to anybody who had a pulse, myself included. I had a 3-year-old daughter and a soon-to-be ex-husband. I purchased a house and everything was going well, making money in the market. Then the subprime mortgage crisis happened in 2008, 2009. Money wasn't coming in, had to decide if I had to pay my mortgage or pay my car payment. I kept the house, but that was temporary. Throughout that, it was frustrated. I went down to the town of Hempstead building department to see if I can subdivide my land. And that was difficult in itself, finding someone to give me the help. And it was just difficult. Throughout that process, I was in the house alone with my 3-year-old, at that time she was 5, asking God what to do. He got me out of it. I finally was accepted for the HARP program, got a part-time job, and said, how can I help my community? I live in Uniondale and I work in Uniondale. And I work in Uniondale, Roosevelt, and Hempstead. And throughout the time, I'm seeing the houses boarded up. I was also doing BPOs, that's the broker price opinion, helping out the lenders know what the property values are for people who are there foreclosing on. I understood how it felt to be afraid to answer my phone, answer the door. Investors were coming at the door, didn't know what to do. I was able to get out of it, got involved with the Uniondale Community Land Trust, where what we are made up, we're a nonprofit organization made up of Uniondale residents and stakeholders in Uniondale who work in Uniondale. What we do is we revitalize the community. We give sustainable housing at affordable prices to people in the community and outside of the community. What I've seen throughout 2006 to current times is when the market was down in 2008, 2009, 2010, prices were low. People were losing their houses in the Uniondale Hempstead area, and investors were coming in with cash and purchasing these houses, not helping the community members or giving information to homeowners on how they can keep their house. There was no organization out there. It was kind of tough to get in line to get help from government officials. So it was just difficult. So what the Uniondale Community Land Trust has done is we purchase houses, and we're in the process of getting help to help homeowners with the foreclosure process and help them stay in their houses, which will revitalize our community, help the individuals in the community feel empowered and know what they need to do to stay in their houses and be a better community member. Once we all know owning a house it gives us a high percentage of being a better community member. Two takeaways that I would like to share with you and what we need help with in our land trust, Union Community Land Trust, and I believe in any land trust, is we need help from the officials, government officials, being that to get the first look process. We are in competition with the investors in the community. Investors are coming in, purchasing these houses for cash. We are a startup nonprofit organization where we need help. And actually, I apologize. We have limited funds to purchase these houses. We just want to have the opportunity to see any of the properties that are in the Uniondale School District area, to be able to purchase these houses at an affordable price so we can fix them up and sell them in turn at an affordable price. Brand new renovated house to anyone in the community and outside of the community to come live in Uniondale. Second takeaway that I would like to share with you is we also need help or have some sort of allegiance or a way to navigate with the town of Hempstead building departments. Because what I found with myself personally and with the Uniondale Community Land Trust is it's difficult to get permits and to know who to speak with to navigate that process, because we're on a time clock. We have limited funds and we owe people. We've taken out loans to purchase these houses. We just need a way to expedite that process with the board, with the town of Hempstead building departments.
Nicole, I suspect the word investor is a polite one for slumlord.
Yes, yeah, we have a lot of those in Uniondale. Thank you, Larry. They purchase the houses. I live right by Hofstra. They purchase the houses, they rent them out. They don't live in the community to either Hofstra students or other people in the community, and they're just collecting monies, and garbage is in the street. It's hard for the simple necessities of a community that we pay our taxes for to receive that here. So yeah, you're right, slumlords overall, not
Right,
all of
maybe
them,
not
but
all of
I would
them,
say
but
overall.
yeah, there's a sad history in the area of that. Thank you, Nicole. That was terrific, very powerful. Charlene, the Uniondale CLT story, as you heard, highlights the importance of public partnerships. So how is the CDA collaborating with the Hempstead CLT to support revitalization in the village? And what can local governments do to support the development of CLTs in general?
Thank you, Larry. So Nicole hit on a lot of critical points that greatly affect the ability for a community land trust to be effective and efficient as they work to bring stabilize neighborhoods and bring more affordable housing choices to current and future residents in the community. When I've been at the CDA since January of 2018, and I also happen to serve as a member of the board of the Uniondale Community Land Trust. And when I came on board and I found out through conversations that Hempstead had a sister organization that was founded at the same time as Uniondale, and I was not aware of that, but I decided that a land trust could be a tool in the economic revitalization toolkit for the Community Development Agency. And so I worked with local residents to reorganize and relaunch the Hempstead Community Land Trust with supporting them, giving them some grants for operational expenses, facilitating organizational meetings, providing technical assistance as they got up and running. And I'm really happy to say that they're in their second year of operation after the relaunch, and they're going like gangbusters. And so when we talk about the role that a government agency can play, there's multiple roles. Number one, the Incorporated Village of Hempstead receives an annual allocation through the Nassau County Urban Consortium of HUD funds through the Community Development Block Grant Program. We carve out a line item of those funds for acquisition of blighted properties, and the CDA also owns vacant lots. And we have decided to make properties that we acquire through the Community Development Block Grant funding or vacant lots that we own available to our local land trust to co-develop them and put them back on the tax rolls as long-term affordable housing. One of the challenges that land trusts have is, again, as Nicole stated, is finding money to acquire houses. Being a government agency with a source of funds and being able to partner with the land trust is a great benefit, because not only are we able to pick up the cost for acquiring the properties, we also can bring funding to help with monitoring, oversight, cost overruns that oftentimes occur in a development. As a government agency, we can absorb those unexpected costs and we can defray a portion of the rehabilitation costs if that needs be. We can also partner with the local land trust to be able to provide them with operational support, space, as well as operational funding. And additionally, for a newer organization, we can offer play the role of a fiscal agent should donors want to come in and give money to the land trust before they have built sufficient capacity to manage those on their own. We have trust accounts in place to be able to receive donations on behalf of the land trust and make those available, because as a government agency, we still maintain a level of monitoring and oversight for grant compliance purposes, and we're able to extend that to any donations that are given to the land trust. Additionally, the CDA has a down payment assistance program that we launched for the first time in 2019. And so any land trust homes that's co-developed with the CDA, we offer up to $25,000 in down payment assistance for the eventual homeowner who comes in to purchase that home through a lottery process. Additionally, we support and fund first-time homebuyer education And we also provide technical assistance for maintaining long-term stability in a neighborhood through stewardship and capacity building programs. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, one other role that the CDA has played is we act as a funding partner for grant applications. And so that's a critical role because the CDA as a government entity is able to navigate different funding sources that the CLT as a nonprofit might not be able to. And the CLT as a nonprofit can navigate certain funding sources that we as a government entity would not have access to. But combining those different entities and resources, we're able to leverage and exponentially go after funding that may be available through the private sector as well as through different government entities. And one of the things, being a government partner and working with a local community land trust, we make sure that failure is never an option. And so however we need to shore up the land trust, however, whatever technical assistance we need to provide and fund, whatever additional grant support, we have written in the Hempstead Community Land Trust as a nonprofit that we will fund going forward as an annual allocation in our funding cycle to make sure that they have the support for operational expenses going forward. And those are some of the resources that we're able to bring. Now, another thing Nicole mentioned is being able to navigate the building permit and the town in the case of Uniondale. Fortunately, being an incorporated village, we have many of those, well, we have all of those structures and functions and agency functions through our own building department. And so we're able to expedite and work with our building department to get building permits and remove any barriers that government may put in place as far as checks and balances that need to be taken care of, and working with our counterparts in different agencies. Another critical thing, Long Island is a very high cost living environment and a very highly taxed government environment. And particularly in an incorporated village, we have multiple layers of taxation. Being a government entity, it allows us for those properties that we co-develop to work with our local tax assessor to talk about the valuation and the tax assessment valuation of those properties. We're also able to take advantage of, say, Nassau County first-time home buyers tax abatement programs, and we're able to foster those kinds of incentives for our ultimate homeowner and be able to help them navigate those different abatements as well. Let's see. One other point I'd like to make before I sign off for now. We look at the CLT model not only as a neighborhood stabilization model, but also for a generational wealth building model. Historically, in the Black community, land ownership and housing ownership and being able to transfer that ownership interest and that equity in the land and in the home to future generations has been a critical wealth sustaining mechanism in our communities. Through the highly impacted foreclosure crisis, we've lost a lot of that. The land trust in partnership with government support can help recapture those important home ownership models and equity building models for future generations. And allowing the land trust also allows us to transfer the home interest and the ground lease interest in the home to, we can will it through future generations. We can devise it and transfer it among family members. It's only if we choose to sell it outside of our family dynamic that the restrictions apply to maintain affordability for future homeowners. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. So Peter, your community land trust work is somewhat different in that the Long Island Housing Partnership's working with Sandy damaged properties. So why did LIHP decide to expand into CLT units? What do you see as the model's potential for improving affordability at the regional level? Because you guys, are from one end of the island to the other. And what are the challenges that you faced as you're scaling up?
Sure. Thank you, Larry. And Nicole and Charlene, I echo a lot of your comments, but I'm going to start off by answering Larry's first question. The partnership's been around for over 30 years, building affordable housing. There are basically three models that are used throughout the nation: deed covenants and restrictions, limited equity co-ops, which we did one in Highland Greens in Melville, and community land trust, or some combination of those three. And Grounded Solutions Network is a national organization that really monitors a lot of shed equity models. So if you want more information, it's a place that you can go on land trust, because they concentrate as well on land trust. But us at the partnership, we had often an opportunity of what we call Long Island Rebuild. And after Sandy, there were properties that were available by the state to allow us to build for affordable housing in certain areas throughout Long Island, which is our region. We got offered 23 properties in high opportunity areas for low moderate income families across Long Island in various multiple jurisdictions. As you know, on Long Island, we have many jurisdictions controlling it, from the 2 cities to the 13 towns to the 2 counties to the 95 villages. Plus, any given day, the bottom line is these properties were being provided to us, and ultimately we are in the process of developing 21 of those properties. But the real key thing, Larry, that you mentioned is building economies of scale. In order for the land trust to be successful, we have to get those homes built. And I'm sure Nicole and Paul over at the Uniondale Community Land Trust would say one rehab, how long it has taken, or how one new home construction, how long it has taken. And Nicole even personally said her experience with getting approvals and moving them forward. You need to have a quantity of these homes to make that land trust successful. So building the economies of scale of the land trust was critical. Allowing us to start with these properties allowed us to set up the CLT model on a regional approach and use it for future developments that we are building. So all our homes that we are building now, once we finish one last development in Islip, will be put into the land trust. And why did LIHP, after 30 plus years, expand its work into the land trust area? Well, we've been looking at that model for many years. I think we'll talk about it in a moment when we talk about some of the challenges that are faced as the not-for-profit in creating the land trust model. But basically, what everyone else said, it was secure, affordable housing in perpetuity, to allow the homeowners to build wealth, to keep the homes affordable for future homeowners, and to continue the stewardship programs for homeowners. But one amazing thing that happened that caught a lot of the government officials' attention was during the foreclosure crisis. During the foreclosure crisis, a lot of the government officials could not get in touch with anyone. And as they were having people abandon their homes in their communities, the surrounding property values also went down, and they heard more and more about what could be done to prevent this in the future. And one of the options is really the land trust. And I think Chris gave statistics earlier that is amazing. And they are right on the same numbers that we've dealt with over the years as well. People who have been properly educated in the home buying process, people that have been mortgage counseled to make sure they don't overextend themselves, were not the people that went into foreclosure, the people that we worked with the affordable housing over the years. It was the people who did not. So by providing the stewardship principles over the years, this hopefully will correct the issue down the road, and it will allow, through our ground lease model, to get in a little bit earlier if a family is having a problem maintaining that home, so we can step in. But as far as improving the affordability for the region here, I mean, we're creating all across Long Island. And in a moment, I'll talk about the success that we've done in the last 2 years while the land trust has been starting the construction, but it's also keeping the affordability in perpetuity. We're a high cost area on Long Island, was mentioned earlier. And when you take out the land value, which is one of the highest costs, then you can reduce the purchase price. So the challenges are really critical from Long Island Housing Partnership's point of view. The first is we needed funding to create the CLT Corporation, set up standardized documents and procedures so that, and what we're talking about is establishing a deed, establishing the ground lease, establishing how we're going to provide stewardship principles, what it means, and put that all into the ground lease so that the families know what, is required of them. The other thing is the administrative funding while doing this had to be backed, and it was backed by a private source. Citibank was very instrumental in providing us funding to set up the corporation and to build capacity through an accelerated growth fund. And basically, my concern as the CEO and president was to make sure that we had enough properties in inventory that we could build these homes, that we had to raise public and private subsidies to make these homes affordable. Even though we were getting the properties, you still needed to help serve a low moderate income family and make sure that you weren't putting them in jeopardy. So for example, just alone on the 21 properties that we're building in the Long Island Rebuild, we raised $4.6 million of government and private funds to put in to make those homes affordable, to bring down the cost. Obviously, as we talked earlier, we heard that taxes also are, an issue on Long Island. So the only way you can accomplish that, to reduce it in one way, is to reduce the purchase price to make it affordable. I think that the CLT education was tremendous. I'm glad we're all working together, Uniondale, Hempstead, Charlene, because, you had to explain to the buyers what a land trust model was. You had to explain to the buyer and seller attorneys what was going on with the land trust model. You had lenders. I think that's still an issue in New York City, where you have to find lenders who's willing to provide mortgages on the land trust and understand that concept, from the appraisers who work with the lenders to make sure that they don't provide you an appraisal, including the land value, to make sure that, the title companies know what's going on, that they're getting the right documents, they know how to record those documents at the closing table. The realtors, it's very important. Realtors sell some of our properties. We want them to understand what subsidies go into these properties, what restrictions are on the purchases, and also to understand the whole land trust model as a whole. Nicole, I'd love to work with you as a realtor, because it's important for them to explain, because they're the first front when someone's looking to buy a house. They'll go to the realtor and talk to them and learn more about what's available. The clerk's office, when we got to the closing, both county clerk's office, we had to sit down with them. They weren't used to seeing a deed that was for a structure and not the property. And how was this going to be done? And how do we record this type of deed? It's done commercially. A lot of times the land is on a lease basis and the structure is owned by someone else, but it wasn't done in the residential area and it wasn't familiar. And when something's not familiar, you know how long it takes to get them up to speed. So thank God that Albany was already established and Rochester had some land trust that we could point to and get their information. And we sat down with them and had an educational process for the county clerk's office. We had them sit down and understand what a land trust is. The tax assessor's office, I can't tell you how many tax assessor's offices we went to throughout Long Island to talk about the land trust model. Our concern was, as a community land trust, we wanted to make sure that the tax bill was also sent to us to make sure that it was paid, so that we couldn't have a default situation on one of our homes. Insurance carriers, New York, most insurance carriers nationally, you use the homeowner's insurance as the coverage for the land. But if someone's dog bites someone else on that land, they're going to sue the person who owns the structure, and they're also going to sue the person where the structure is on the land underneath of that. So you wanted to make sure that as the CLT, we could get the proper insurance, and it wasn't another homeowner's policy. There was very little liability the CLT has, but yet if you want to make sure that you have insurance coverage to cover any legal cases that are brought against the CLT, so that makes sure it's a strong corporation. And then I think what the biggest issue, and it's been mentioned throughout this morning, is understanding the time frame for Long Island and development or rehab. You with our properties in the rebuild, we're not taking down a home until we have a permit to build a new home, building permit to build a new home. And otherwise it's just going to become a parkland. All right. So original intent was to rehab those 20 something homes, but instead we felt it was best for the homeowner to have a new home, have the warranties that are available to them, have very little cost to them as they move forward, and That was one of the things that we were looking at, because it would cost us more to rehab a home sometimes than take it down and build a new home. But the timeframes are really what's critical, because the timeframes rely on what funding goes in, when the funding has to be utilized by, make sure that everything's on board, so that it all coordinates. It's a very timely process. It's not like a typical home that you can build, and when you build it, you close it. It's a home that you may have to make sure the subsidies are in place. You have to go to contract after the subsidies are in place with the purchaser. They have to review the ground lease. Everything has to come together at the end of the day. And, I'm pleased to say that, the partnership has, and I'll say in a moment what we've done in the last 2 years, but, I'm pleased to say everything was moving along quite well until we got hit with COVID. And the COVID hit, and delays start with approvals, because the municipalities had to find new ways to do public hearings and have public input for approvals. Some municipalities had closed when you're ready to get the CO. I think one municipality told us that we were 159 down on the list to get our CO out from being typed and delivered to us. Obviously, who knows how long that would have taken, but we got that moved up. But it's really critical for local governments to work with the land trust, because we can't have that property out there exposed, someone breaking into. We have to make sure that no one moves into it. Otherwise, we have another whole issue involved, and make sure that no one causes damage to it. Plus, you have a family waiting to get in there who's getting out of another location, and we need to time that appropriately. So that was one of the issues.
Thank you, Peter. While we're waiting for questions from the audience, and in fact, if you have them, post them on the chat, and I'll try to relay them. Chris, I don't know if your research would bring you to be able to answer this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if there have been any examples around the country where CLTs have been scaled up on the order of what Peter was talking about.
Yeah, there are a few. Probably the largest and the best known large land trust is in Burlington, Vermont, which manages hundreds of units. I'm not sure where they're what level they're at the moment, but part of the reason that they were able to grow so quickly is that essentially the city's housing authority kind of outsourced a lot of their production to that nonprofit, and so they've become a large, much larger than most land trusts across the country. There are other examples from places like Oregon and Minneapolis of land trusts that have also grown significantly. And one of the interesting things is that there have been a couple of different strategies that they've taken to do that. Some of them have branched out into commercial development. Some have begun new programs that are essentially buyer directed. So the buyer goes out and selects a property, and then that property is essentially placed into the land trust, with the CLT providing public subsidy. There was one case in Boston, the Dudley Street Initiative, a very grassroots kind of community organization based program that successfully had worked with the city to use eminent domain against a number of blighted properties. This was in Boston, an area that was really struggling with blight, and they managed to kind of redevelop like a whole block in Boston. So there are a couple of different. Several organizations have scaled up, but they've taken very different routes to scale.
Thank you, Chris. So this is a professional audience, and I'm wondering if Nicole, you're a broker in addition to being someone who works promoting the Uniondale Land Trust. Any particular advice for brokers who might see this as a particularly fruitful place to deal?
I feel like we need to be educated because when I first got involved with the land trust, it's a bit confusing. And since I took on the position as vice president and the clerk, I'm understanding a whole lot more since I'm taking the minutes. So I feel that they should be an ongoing webinar or course which would inform brokers who work in the area and outside of the area, because we never know where our buyers are coming from and what their situation is, financial situation. So whoever I meet, I always tell them about the land trust. I tell them about the down payment assistance programs that LIHP has. And I also tell them about the Hempstead Community Land Trust and NACA. So I feel we should be educated. I think perhaps there might be a continuing education class for us realtors to go through, because we have to take continuing ed classes every 2 years.
Charlene, you're an attorney. You deal with attorneys all the time. Peter as well. Any advice in particular for our friends at the bar? The Bar Association as in bar, not the bar.
Yes. Interesting enough, Larry, just early Monday, we actually had a Dean's Hour with the Nassau Academy of Law with representatives from Freddie Mac. Peter mentioned how we don't have a critical number of banks who understand the structure and function of financing land trust mortgages. And we were able to have a CLE program with representatives from Freddie Mac that talked to attorneys through our real property committee about how considerations in structuring the financing of community land trust mortgages, and many of the things that that Peter mentioned about insurance carriers, the county clerk, the tax assessor, all of those elements come into play. And to Nicole's point, Nicole, I would recommend that you reach out to the Long Island Board of Realtors to make a suggestion about a course for understanding community land trust. I know that they are ramping up some course offerings around the recent feedback they've gotten about the racial divide in Long Island. And I think this would go a long way as a course offering for LIBOR as well. If I may, Larry, I see one of the questions in the chat box talks about incorporating the missing middle housing types.
I was just going to ask that: cottage houses, accessory apartments, multifamily micro units, adaptive reuses of big box stores. Did you want to address that?
Not particularly that point. One of the things that that's a particular issue here in the village of Hempstead is we have a lot of seniors who have huge houses with a huge tax load who want to stay in the community but have no place to downsize to. And we also have young professionals who've gotten their college degrees returning to home and no place to land. And so those are markets that we are looking to cater to as well, and provide more diverse offerings. For example, we have one of our larger lots that we're redeveloping. We're developing a series of townhomes with 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bath townhomes on a smaller unit size. And additionally, we're looking into rent-to-own models as well. And so we believe that those kinds of innovative approaches will address some of the concerns that have been laid out here in Long Island.
And so, and you're doing that through the land trust model.
Absolutely. We've made a decision that all of the housing that we developed will be co-developed with the local land trust and under the land trust model to maintain longer term affordability than would normally come with using traditional HUD source funding.
So we've been focusing on Uniondale and Hempstead, and the communities that are sometimes referred euphemistically as underserved, disinvested, struggling, if you want to get into the media parlance. The question is, outside of communities where zombie homes tend to proliferate more often, where the level of foreclosures are higher, is there a place for CLTs in higher communities with a higher economic demographic? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Peter, from the regional
Yeah.
perspective?
No, definitely. And that's all the more reason why the land trust model is a good model, because you don't want someone just moving into a home and then flipping the home and making a killing on it and not allowing that home to stay in the affordability pool. So yes, Long Island is an area, and that's why we cover all of Long Island. It's an area where, you know, we can pick up houses, and there's a lot of homes that were in foreclosure that we worked with families to try to keep their homes, but it was across Long Island. The foreclosure crisis didn't just hit certain communities, it hit most communities. So if you pick up a home there, and I think Nicole had mentioned it earlier about getting properties. I mean, that's the biggest issue. I mean, we're all in competition with the open market. And when someone's picking up you know, it was a perfect example doing the neighborhood stabilization program where, you know, the word on the street was don't deal with government programs because they can't move them quick enough. And yet if a private investor came in, they bought up the house immediately, even if they offered $500 more. So it was a game. So we had to prove to them that we can compete in the open market. And that's the hardest thing here, Larry, is to secure these properties all across the island. And once that's done, you want to keep them in the affordable inventory.
So we have a question on, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Charlene.
Just to piggyback on one thing Nicole mentioned, is there is a national First Look program that's shepherded by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. There are brokers that have to be trained and licensed in brokering these properties, but they're able to bring properties that are owned by HUD, et cetera, or Fannie Mae to government agencies and registered nonprofits on a first look basis before it goes to the open market. And that has been a successful approach for us and identifying properties that are within our price point before it goes into the open market.
I would just add to that in some ways that answers one of the questions that was asked in chat regarding how land trusts identify properties for purchase. One of the ways that we've identified properties is, I mean, it's partly based on availability. As Nicole said, since we're in competition with investors, we depend on, you know, the land bank properties, on first look properties, because we're able to acquire them. Also, obviously, the same due diligence and you know, we do the same due diligence as any other property developer would do, and the properties have to pencil out. So there's some properties that we've been presented with that we haven't acquired simply because there was too much remediation that needed to be done, too much rehabilitation work that needed to be done, and we couldn't make it work. So that's more or less how we choose properties.
Thanks, Chris. Ashira, how much time do we have left?
Sorry about that. You have, I would say like 3 to 4 minutes. It's
Okay.
12:55 now. Yes.
Let's see. There were 2 questions I wanted to get to from the audience. One was on what happens. What's the turnover rate? What happens to the families that purchase these homes? How long do they typically stay? What's their next move, literally and figuratively? I know there are people who want to build wealth, which you really can't do to any great degree here. Mm-hmm. So any data on that? Any research on it?
Yeah, there's some research, and again, I would rely on the Burlington Associates as a source here. The average length of residence in a CLT home is 7 years. When they've studied these houses nationally. On Long Island, I know the question in chat was about Long Island specifically. Since CLTs are relatively new on Long Island, we haven't been able to, we don't know yet where people are going to move after they live in these houses. But nationally, you know, they stay for 7 years, and a majority of them actually move from a CLT home actually into a market rate home, which reflects kind of, as Charlene was mentioning, the asset building and household wealth building function of CLT homes, which can often function as starter homes for people as they attempt to enter home ownership.
Larry, can I also Can I also mention Long Island's unique, like any other thing that Long Island is known for. But most people who get into these homes really don't have an opportunity over the years. They build a wealth in their home, but most of them are very, it's the only opportunity they may have. They want that security, they can afford it. And I don't see a lot of people moving as fast like in other areas where they build wealth and move up. So they're in there. Some of our homeowners are sending their next generations to the partnership to start looking for home ownership and still living in the home that they grew up. And they said it's much more than a home. It's their family, the rooms, the bedrooms, everything. So it's hard to say right now. And I agree with Chris, but there is statistics done by Grounded Solutions Network that has a lot of this information that's being asked on the questions. And I would just refer people to talk to them as well if they want a national approach on some of these studies. And they can reach that info@groundedsolutions.org, all spelled out. So, I mean, these CLTs have been around for some time now. There's a statewide CLT, but there's over 200 something in the country, and everyone's looking at them and monitoring them and doing studies on them. So I think we'll learn.
If I could just break in, Peter, would you be able to post that website in the chat for everyone?
Sure. Yep,
that would be great. And I think now we're just about out of time.
Oh, okay.
So I want to thank all of you for, sharing this information with us and giving us an overview of, this option that I think not everyone is aware of. So thank you all very much. And at this point, I am going to take a brief break to give our first attendance verification code. Okay, as you can see from the slide, the first verification attendance code is Trust 50. Trust 50. Again, please make a note of it. For the attorneys in the room, you will need it to get the CLE credit. You will have to provide it when you fill out your affirmation form. Again, the affirmation form is available in the materials, the conference materials from today. All right. So the next item on our agenda, the next program that we have is, I'm delighted to welcome David Altman, and he is going to provide us with a refresher on the basics of New York zoning and land use law. David is a founding partner of Brown and Altman, LLC, and he has extensive experience in real estate law, commercial litigation, and environmental law. And as a land use attorney, he practices before municipalities throughout Long Island, as well as New York City. As an aside, David collaborated with me on the creation of our real estate externship program. And I appreciate his time and effort, not just for today, but for that as well. So with that, I'm really pleased to turn the program over to David.
Good afternoon, Ashira. Thank you very much. I appreciate the shout out. I'd like to thank you for inviting me this afternoon to participate in this panel discussion. And I also would like to thank Hofstra Law School and Dean Prudenti as well. If I just may, a little shout out for our firm. We recently revised the masthead a couple of weeks ago and added our partner Michael DeLeo to the masthead. So the firm is now Brown, Altman, and DeLeo. And some of you who are attending this afternoon's webinar may work with Mike in terms of transactional real estate. I've been asked to give a little primer on zoning and land use here in New York in terms of fundamentals. And I often find looking at the fundamentals to be helpful because we as practitioners don't often have the opportunity to touch upon them during our day-to-day business. And it's often helpful to understand where the authority to zone comes from and how it flows from a top-down approach here in the state of New York. As most of you know, and many of you are municipal officials and also practitioners on the zoning and land use side. We have in the state of New York municipal home rule law, which allows our local governments to do a great deal of things in terms of managing their day-to-day affairs, of particular import being, of course, the land within the boundaries of the local municipality. In fact, as of 2018, there are over 930 towns and 530 villages across the state of New York. And I believe here on Long Island, we have roughly 110 or 113 different local municipal units. Now, the authority of a local municipality to regulate and control its land use matters is a function of a sort of a top-down approach flowing initially from the state constitution. And the authority to adopt local law and to manage what goes on within the municipality starts with the state constitution itself, in particular, Article 9, which is, of course, the home rule section. In particular, if you look to Section 2 of of Article 10, it discusses the home rule powers of local governments, including the statute of local governments. And it provides in relevant part that the legislature shall provide for the creation and organization of local governments in such manner as shall secure them the rights, powers, privileges, and immunities granted to them by this Constitution, subject to the Bill of Rights of Local Governments and other applicable provisions of this Constitution. The legislature shall, 1, enact and may from time to time amend the statute of local governments, granting to local governments powers including but not limited to those of the local legislation and administration, in addition to the powers vested by this article. In addition to the powers granted in the statute of local governments and other law, every local government has the power to adopt and amend laws that are not inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution or general laws of the state relating to its property, affairs, and government. And every local government shall have the power to adopt and amend local laws not inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution or general laws relating to the following subjects, and of particular import, certainly as it relates to land use and zoning, is the acquisition, care, management, and use of its highways, roads, streets, avenues, and property, and as well as the conduct of the health, safety, and welfare of the persons and property. In other words, the police power of local government to adopt law and to enforce that law for the benefit of the residents. General laws and would typically be your consolidated laws of the state, which adds the sort of flesh to the bones of, or the framework by which local government derives its authority, typically of a procedural and substantive nature as it relates to the administration and, of course, adoption of local law itself. Now, Section 10 of the Municipal Home Rule Law, which is entitled the General Powers of Local Governments, provides that the local governments, again, have the authority in connection with their administrative duties, and particularly the police power itself, to acquire, care, and manage the use of its highways, roads, and streets, as I previously mentioned, sort of piggybacking on what's granted under the statute of local governments, and to, of course, manage their duties and affairs, including the property within their boundaries. Now, there are typically 3 types of rules or law that local government rely upon in connection with managing their zoning and land use affairs. The most important being a local law itself. A local law is an act of legislation from the legislative body of a local municipality, typically the town board or village board of trustees, as the case may be. And the local law is a legislative act that carries with it the same weight as an act of the state legislature. Local laws are filed with the village clerk, often with the county clerk, as well as the Secretary of State. And depending upon, again, the county in which you're situated, it could be the County Planning Commission as well. Then you have ordinances, which is an act of local legislation on a subject specifically delegated to local governments by the state legislature. Typically acts by ordinance or legislation by ordinance is reserved to towns, whereas not to the county or village. And then finally, you have a resolution, which is typically a declaration from a local governing body or other board within the municipality itself, which takes action on a particular matter. Resolutions, of course, typically are not used to adopt regulatory practices. Local law must be consistent with the state and the state constitution and not in derogation thereof. The foregoing maxim is particularly true where the state has preempted the regulation of certain subject matter. In other words, and a good example would be the general standards for considering use and area variances, which are set forth in section 267 of the town law, and I believe section 7-712 of the village law, where the state has set forth a regulatory scheme whereby municipal boards of appeals are required to follow the framework outlined in those statutes. Another example where preemption comes into effect, and I deal with this regularly in my practice as I represent a number of clients in the food and beverage industry, is with respect to alcohol sales and the SLA regulations of the state of New York. The state has a comprehensive regulatory scheme when it comes to issuance of liquor licenses, how they're administered, and of particular importance is the sale of alcohol in terms of days of the week and times of day, such that local municipalities are typically preempted from otherwise regulating those particular issues. In addition to local law, the local municipalities also work through and by a comprehensive plan. Now, not every municipality has a comprehensive plan. In fact, typically, at least in my experience, most of the towns I've dealt with, not all the towns I've dealt with here on Long Island, have comprehensive plans, but not every village has a comprehensive plan. In fact, I provided a similar webinar last night to the Suffolk County Village Officials Association, and in discussing this with my co-presenter last night, who is village council, he indicated that roughly half of the villages he represents, and I believe he represents 8 or 9 of them, in fact, do not have comprehensive plans. Now, a comprehensive plan is an interesting concept, but it provides for uniformity and update of the goals and objectives of the local municipality to manage the land within its boundaries. Comprehensive plans should be updated regularly, the timing of which is up to the local municipality based upon a myriad of factors, but plans should be revisited regularly. My experience in terms of comprehensive plan update is it's typically done anywhere from every 5 to 10 years, but not more than that. The idea of the comprehensive plan being to encapsulate the policy objectives and goals of the municipality. Comprehensive plans are in fact and should be adopted as in the means of a local law, and it's often filed as such. Comprehensive plan is typically initially reviewed and considered by the local planning board, often as the fact-finding entity, and the planning board will provide recommendation to the legislative body, whether it be the town board or the village board of trustees. Now, a comprehensive plan doesn't have to be a single document or series of bound documents, which conceptually we'd all think would be a wonderful idea in terms of keeping that comprehensive plan in a single source document. But a comprehensive plan by rule can consist of a multitude of things, including written materials, written graphs, photographs, charts, studies, resolutions, reports, and other descriptive material that identify the goals, objectives, principles, guidelines, policies, etc. of the municipality. Comprehensive plan, as I mentioned, is typically an act of a legislative act done through local law, and the comprehensive plan is subject to public hearing and the notice requirements in connection with a public hearing. once the comprehensive plan is considered and ultimately adopted, it gets filed as with the, of course, the municipal clerk, with the county clerk, often the county planning commission, and then with the Secretary of State up in Albany. Now, the authority to regulate, moving forward, the authority to regulate local land use typically passes through the legislative body, either again, speaking of, from the perspective of towns or villages, wherein they delegate to the particular entities or particular boards within the local municipality the authority to hear and consider certain matters. I will note that by rule, a local municipality is required to have a board of appeals. And as a land use practitioner, thankfully, we do have a board of appeals. The board of appeals is typically the safety valve in the municipality, wherein strict compliance with the local zoning ordinance may not be possible. I happen to do a fair amount of work for the retail petroleum industry here on Long Island, and redevelopment of gas stations is a large part of our practice. And for many of those stations sit on what we call legacy sites, typically 10, 12, 15,000 square feet corner sites that were built during the 50s and 60s. Today, for those sites to comply with local zoning regulation, even from the bulk requirements, is just not possible. And by rule, the Board of Appeals is in place such that they can determine and vary the application as necessary in harmony with the purpose and intent of the local zoning ordinance and patterns of development within the community. With regard to the Board of Appeals itself, and I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit in my material, the Board of Appeals is intended to, as I mentioned, provide that relief valve. Typically, the Board of Appeals jurisdiction initially is of an appellate nature. And what I mean by that is when you're going to the Board of Appeals to seek relief, often it's from a decision made by the local building official. It is the local building official who in the first instance has the authority to hear, decide, and interpret, and of course enforce the local building and zoning code. And by rule here in New York, as a predicate to filing an appeal, whether it be for a use variance or an area variance, there must be a denial issued by the local building official indicating that the application does not comply for various reasons with the local zoning code. Another point of practice before the Zoning Board of Appeals is one of interpretation. And that is where the applicant has an application denied by the local building official, and relief is sought from the building official on the basis that, hey, you made a mistake. This is not the way it should be interpreted. More often than not, that tends to come with items of either first impression, as it either relates to a particular use or new use within the community, or within the wording of a statute per se. That is another means by which you appear in front of the Board of Appeals. Now, once the municipal official's decision, or I should say the building inspector's decision is issued, that decision is typically filed with the clerk of the municipality and in the building inspector's office within 5 days thereafter. And you, by rule, meaning you as the applicant, by rule, have 60 days to file your appeal with the ZBA. Interesting question came up last night. What happens if you as the applicant are in the process of putting your application materials together for the Board of Appeals, and the 60-day clock runs, and you ask the building inspector for an extension of the 60-day notice, or you ask them to reissue the notice and they decline. Well, you're in a tough position in that your application is now stale, and arguably you're going to have to come back with what constitutes at least a substantial change of circumstance, requiring you to modify your application before you can have recourse to the Board of Appeals. Interesting thought. The Board of Appeals has 62 days, from the conclusion of the public hearing in which to render its decision. The decision itself is filed within the municipal clerk's office, as well as with the clerk of the BZA within 5 days thereafter. Now, what happens if the Board of Appeals doesn't issue its decision within 62 days? Case law says that if you don't issue your decision, and now by statute, by the way, that the application is deemed denied. Another interesting addition to the state law came about roughly 10 or 15 years ago, probably about 15 years ago, as a result of a case known as the Tall Trees case. And that is what happens if less than a majority of the Board of Appeals votes to approve your application. In other words, so you have a 7-member Board of Appeals, you have a quorum present, but not the full board, and less than the majority members of the entire board vote to approve. Well, by rule, it's now deemed a denial of the decision. The ZBA's determination, and again, most practitioners know the standard, cannot be arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, and must be based on a rational basis, meaning it has support, objective support, in the record before the board. The court's review of the ZBA's determination is limited to the record in front of it. In other words, the court is not free to substitute its judgment for that of the Board of Appeals. Interestingly, the Board of Appeals, as we know, is an independent entity and should be free from outside intrusion or interference with the legislative board, legislative body, or even the executive body of the local municipality. In other words, a town board or a village board of trustees is not in a position and does not have the ability to opine or otherwise influence decision or action of the Board of Appeals, generally speaking. I did mention the issue of interpretation, and I also just mentioned the issue relative to the board's decision as it relates to timing and the number of members of the board who should render that decision. With the Board of Appeals, again being the safety valve in the municipality, usually hears two types of variances, and those variances are described under both town law and the village law. The two typical variances being use variance, and area variance. Use variances, and I think the term is sort of self-explanatory. The particular use at issue is not permitted in the zoning district. And as such, it is the applicant would have to seek a use variance from the Board of Appeals. The standard, and it's a statutory standard that's contained in state law, and as such, local municipal BZAs are required to follow for use variances, and I will just read it so we're all familiar, in that the applicant must prove unnecessary hardship by demonstrating that the Board of Appeals for each and every use permitted under the zoning regulations in the particular district where the property is located, one, that the applicant cannot realize a reasonable return, provided the lack of return is substantial as demonstrated by competent financial evidence. Two, the alleged hardship relating to the property in question is unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood. Three, that the requested use variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And four, that the alleged hardship has not been self-created. This in and of itself is a very, very difficult standard to meet, effectively requiring the applicant to demonstrate that any other permissible use in that district cannot be achieved because of the unique nature of the property. In addition, the standard of, quote, reasonable return is one that's often one for dispute, whereas an applicant is looking to maximize their return on investment, particularly after spending perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars on a development project. The applicant is not, by rule, entitled to the highest and best possible financial return. It's a reasonable return, and that reasonable rate of return is often subject to dispute between what the BZA believes is reasonable and, of course, what the applicant believes is reasonable. The variance granted by the Board of Appeals must be the minimum variance necessary to achieve a particular goal in terms of developing the site. That also holds true as it relates to area variance as well. The demonstration of a use variance must be accomplished by objective financial proof that no other use, as I mentioned, permissible in the district can be made. So in terms of what type of proof you are required to put in place, often we retain the services of an economist or an accountant to provide a full financial analysis. That data should be reviewed thoroughly before being presented, and often should be discussed with the local municipal official to make sure that they are in fact comfortable with the quantum of proof. I'm just going to touch upon the standards for area variance as well. And they are as follows. In making the determination for area variances, which again are the bulk requirements as they relate to the use and development of a site, the issue is whether, one, there will be an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood, or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the variance, whether the benefits sought can be achieved by the applicant by some method feasible or different from what the applicant chooses to put in place, whether the requested area variance is substantial, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood, and whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which factor in and of itself is not self-determinative. Taking into account those 5 factors, the board is required to engage in a balancing test, which is whether the benefit to the applicant outweighs any possible detriment to the community. In rendering decisions as it relates to area variances in particular, the board is required to explore each and every one of those factors. And I have noted, particularly in the last 5, 6, 7 years, that courts have delved rather deeply and have held the board to the standard of making sure that they, in fact, review and engage each one of those factors when we're making their assessments. Another type of zoning application that a Board of Appeals may entertain, and this must typically be delegated by the legislative entity, again, either the town board or the Board of Trustees, is what's called a special use permit or a special exception. Special exceptions or special uses are uses which are in fact permitted under the code, but they are of a particular nature or type where there is concern or reason to have concern by the municipality as to the effects of the particular specially permitted use. Again, gas station, I'll use the gas station analogy, where each and every one of those particular items, uses are considered to be specially permitted uses. The applicant is required to demonstrate compliance with the conditions of the specially permitted use. A Board of Appeals can consider the specially permitted use as a matter of first, as plenary jurisdiction, meaning you don't have to seek a denial notice from the local building official. The local municipal board, or being the town board or the Board of Trustees, can reserve unto itself the authority to hear certain special permits. And of course, that authority can also be delegated to the planning board as well. One issue as it relates to special permits, which often contain bulk considerations and other conditions with regard to the use, is who has the authority to vary the conditions of a special use permit. The board charged with plenary jurisdiction can retain to itself the authority to vary that requirement, or in certain instances, the Board of Appeals also has the authority typically to vary the bulk requirements of a specially permitted use. Specially permitted uses are considered similarly as variance applications, typically by the reviewing board in terms of their actual assessment, balancing again the benefit to the applicant as opposed to the potential detriment to the local community. The board's decision must bear a rational basis to the application itself. It must be set forth in writing. The decision typically has to be filed within 60 days thereafter. And like variances, if an applicant is aggrieved by a decision of a Board of Appeals or the board with plenary jurisdiction for a specially permitted use, you typically have 30 days to file any legal challenge as it relates to that specially permitted use.
So David, I just want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions, because there are lots of them that are coming up in the chat. So you want to.
Yeah, sure. By all means, Sheriff, if you want to go through some questions, happy to do so.
Sure, that's great. Okay, and everyone else, please continue to submit your questions, because we have a lot of good ones. One of them, I'm going to just assert the moderator's privilege for a moment and ask you, well, I guess I have two questions, but I'll let someone else go second. I know that in New York State, there is a very strong home rule statute, and particularly with regard to land use and zoning, local governments have a lot of their own discretion. Mm-hmm. I believe that one of the areas where they do not is with regard to variances. And so I think that there is the New York State has a variance statute, and unlike other types of land use decisions, local boards are required to use that standard. I was just wondering if there are other examples of things like that, and maybe how the interplay of the state and local, discretion, how that works out.
In terms of the standards for considering other types of zoning relief?
Right. I mean, you could also, in terms of area variances as well, if there's tension between the local governments and the state statute, or if everyone accepts it, and how much leeway to courts. You had said that they're quite strict in looking at the 5 factors. Do courts give any leeway to home rule municipalities?
Well, as it relates to variances, whether it's the 5 factors for area or the 4 factors for use, the municipality is required to use that framework in making the assessment. How the municipality applies it is subject to their discretion, but it's got to be based on the record in front of the board at the time. So for instance, and we as practitioners and board members see this all the time, you'll present an application, the applicant will walk in with its team of experts and make a presentation typically based on objective empirical data, expert testimony, et cetera. You'll have a number of folks come in, often in opposition, I hate to say, and they typically are unrepresented, and they will offer what we call generalized community opposition. Oh, it's going to create traffic. There's going to be noise. There's going to be loitering. It's going to devalue my property. But absent expert testimony to support those contentions or objective empirical data to do so, generalized community opposition is typically not acceptable, and the courts have routinely said you can't do that, and you can't rely on generalized community opposition as a basis to deny an application or to impermissibly condition an application.
And that leads right into one of the questions that was put on the chat, which is exactly that. how does the ZBA weigh community opinion, community opposition against, a proposed development, and I think, well, I'll let you respond to that. I think this is what
Sure.
we were talking about.
So even though a BZA is a quasi-judicial board and is treated as such by the court, the rules of evidence don't apply, right? So the board is free to consider that type of generalized community testimony, but it's supposed to be weighted accordingly. And look, boards of appeals are typically represented by counsel, or they have counsel at their disposal, and that board's counsel should be guiding them in terms of the underlying principles for weighing and assessing evidence for and against an application and how to weight it in terms of their decision.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Another one of the questions that's in the chat is about regionally significant projects. And if a project is considered regionally significant, but is being blocked by the local community boards, are there any ways to supersede local zoning authority? Or in your experience as an attorney and practicing attorney involved in this, are there strategies that you think would be helpful in moving the local communities forward?
Well, look, the authority to ultimately approve and permit what goes on within the boundaries of the municipality rests with the municipality. If it's a regionally significant project, depending upon size and scope, and something of regional significance is going to be fairly large, it's going to be reviewed not only by potentially the county planning commission, but potentially the regional planning commission as well. But the decision to ultimately grant the zoning and then the permitting as it relates to that project rests with the local municipality. How do you prevent that, or how do you try to mitigate that? Given what we do as zoning practitioners, you're dealing with the politics that often goes with a particular project, and frankly, regional projects and large scale projects are often having a large element of politics. And what we do is we will sit down and front load end the project, sit down with the local municipal officials, whether it's the municipal attorney, the planning commissioner, perhaps even the building commissioner, the supervisor or mayor, as the case may be. If we're in a municipality that has councilmatic districts, you'll sit down with the district council person and you will vet that project with them and get their input ahead of time before you file. It's a lot easier. It's more palatable for a client to say, hey, look, it's easier to spend $5 or $10 grand up front than to be, $50, $75, $100,000 or more, and 2 or 3 years down the road into a significant development project, only to find out that, hey, look, you just cannot overcome those hurdles. So front end loading a project is often very helpful.
And getting through the permitting process is one of the significant challenges, right, on Long Island. Well,
yeah, the permitting process can certainly be multi-layered. We just briefly touched on some of the basic review elements of a zoning application, but the levels are myriad and there are many different hands in the pie. If you're talking something of regional significance, aside from a county planning commission or a regional planning commission, you potentially have the DEC, the New York State DOT, if you're depending upon we're on the state road, county DPW, and in Nassau County in particular, the county DPW is a very lengthy review process. It often takes a year or more to get through that county review process. If you're dealing with economic development aspects of the project and you're dealing with IDAs, all these things factor into it. And in addition, you'll have multiple layers of regulation, whether it's wetlands, LWRP, you know, what else am I thinking of? Groundwater overlay protection districts, et cetera. You know, and then which entity has jurisdiction. And so it's sort of, and it varies from county to county, between Suffolk and Nassau. So by example, in Nassau, subdivision is done through the County Planning Commission. In Suffolk County, subdivision is done through the local municipality, but the Suffolk County Health Department has a huge hand in the regulation and approval of subdivisions as a result of groundwater and flow issues. Suffolk County being roughly, what, 30% sewered, where Nassau County has far greater access to public sewage.
I have a real nuts and bolts question, which is about the notice requirements. So what are the notice requirements to, I guess, apprise a community that a development is being proposed and that they have a right to participate in the hearing and voice concerns?
Depends which board you're in front of. The notice is supposed to be, I think for the BZA, if I remember, I think it's 10 days in the local newspaper and then at least 5 days by compliance mailing. But the local municipality has the right, and typically does, put in additional notice requirements. So notice is often done by the municipality in the local press. The applicant is typically required to send out what's called a compliance mailing, which is often a certified mailing, most of the time to the owner. It can be owner and occupant as well. And depending upon the board and the nature of the hearing, there's also a posting requirement where you're putting notice signs up at the property.
Yeah. So I think we have time for just one more question. So I'm going to pick one that is related to the unusual circumstances that we find ourselves in, which the question was, as to variances, have there been any boards that you interact with that have taken action to become more flexible with variances because of the pandemic? And I would also add, or the opposite, have you found that land use boards are really holding off on granting variances and permits, you know, sort of while they try to figure out, you know, what the next year or two is going to look like? So I guess I just wonder about the effect that the pandemic is having right now on land use boards.
I think the substantive consideration, my experience is that the substantive consideration by land use boards, whether it's zoning boards, planning boards, you know, town board, board of trustees, as the case may be, is unchanged. They are giving it the look that they are supposed to give, and they're taking the same level of concern and consideration and exercising the due diligence that you had seen pre-COVID.
Right.
It's the meeting rules in terms of you know, whether you're on a Zoom or actually appearing in person, that are a little more flexible as a result of the ability to attend and, of course, the public's involvement.
Yeah, and that's going to be a great segue into our next panel, which is exactly on that topic, virtual meetings and land use meetings. So I really, really want to thank you for that excellent presentation. As you said, it's very helpful to always go over the nuts and bolts because oftentimes when you're practicing, you don't really, you know, you're just doing what you know, and it's good to actually go back and see the law. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Okay, so before we do move on to our next panel, which will be on virtual meetings, I am going to present, or I'm going to give you our second attendance verification code. So please direct your attention to a slide. There we go. And so the second code is platform. Again, please be sure to write this down so that you can provide it in your affirmation form. So I'll give everyone another minute. Okay, with that, I am excited to present our next panel, our final panel, which is, I think, a topic that's critical to municipal officials, developers, attorneys, really anyone that has been involved with land use over the past few months. And that is, right, how to run a virtual meeting, right? How do we change the dynamic of a land use hearing and now put it on in a Zoom platform or something like that. And so we're very fortunate to have with us several members of VHB's executive team to teach us a little bit about best practices and to demonstrate some of the platforms and tools that are available now for virtual land use meetings. So our first panelist is Louis Bukowski. Lou is the Director of Environmental Planning for VHB's Long Island office. And Lou is responsible for guiding VHB's clients through the entitlement and approval process and assisting them with the administration of SECRA and NEPA. Since the COVID restrictions went into place, Lou has managed the delivery of virtual meeting support services for municipalities across Long Island, as well as for the New York State Department of State and Empire State Development. Ken Schwartz is the Senior Vice President and the Planning and Design Service Leader at VHB. Ken works with municipalities throughout the East Coast on comprehensive planning studies and economic revitalization programs. And again, over the past 6 months, Ken has been actively involved in assisting municipalities, redevelopment agencies, and real estate developers in holding successful virtual meetings during this pandemic. And finally, we have Alan Belniak, who is the Senior Product Manager for VHB's Smart Asset Management and Inventory System application. And Alan is an accomplished technology and digital professional expert, and he provides a wide skill set across software product management, product marketing, content marketing, community development, and social media. And I am, excited to welcome this panel to kind of show us how we could be doing this better.
Thanks, Ashira. Thanks for having us.
Let me just get the content shared. Okay. Oop. 1 second. There we go. Ken?
Great. Well, thank you, Ashira, and welcome everyone. I was thinking before kicking this off that this is a topic that a year ago, no one would have imagined that this would have been front and center and, the sort of hot topic for how to conduct meetings during a pandemic. But the reality is here we are. So we're going to spend about the next 25-30 minutes kind of going through an area of practice that Lou and Alan and I have been doing for the past 6 or 7 months, which has been assisting municipalities, developers, nonprofit organizations in running successful virtual meetings. So if we can go to the next slide. So a term that I like to use is from adversity comes opportunity. I think back in early March, right when the COVID situation really took toll, and all of the work from home orders were coming out, and people were finding themselves in this new reality, we recognized that there was a real need, particularly at the local municipal government level, to just creating all these challenges around holding meetings where decision making is critical in order to advance various initiatives. And we found, whether it be town, city council, planning board, zoning board of appeals, we're doing a lot of this work with SECRA, both on Long Island as well as in the city of New York, just holding public information workshops. I'm doing one in 2 weeks in Island Park, where with a rezoning effort, and just
educating the public on various things, and then also with private real estate development as well. So there's an opportunity. We recognize the opportunity. If we go to the next slide. So I think there are what we found is that there are a number of efficiencies that you gain with running virtual meetings. And who would have known this when we entered into it? First and foremost, it keeps projects moving forward. I think a lot of municipalities, when this first came out, they didn't know what to do. And the open meeting law requirements were relaxed to allow virtual meetings to take place. We have found that the level of participation and engagement is actually higher with virtual meetings because people don't have to deal with, daycare or finding a parking spot or whatever it might be. They can dial into the meeting from the comfort of their own home. And we found that on a number of instances, the actual level of participation is 2 to 3 times higher with virtual meetings than it would normally have been with in-person meetings. There are a whole series of cost efficiencies. You eliminate travel costs, you eliminate if you need to reserve a meeting space, if you have to serve food for these various meetings, there are cost efficiencies as well. And then also there's a more organized and controlled setting for running the meeting. You eliminate what we call the mob mentality of people grandstanding and holding up the meeting or dominating the conversation. The beauty of running these Zoom meetings is that it's a much more controlled environment. And then I would also say that they're here to stay. I think we've demonstrated that virtual meetings is another way, another tool that's in the toolbox for how to conduct effective public outreach. And I think even when the pandemic is finally gone and we're back to where we can meet in person, I think virtual meetings, there will be a combination of both in-person and virtual meetings. And we're going to showcase some of the new technologies that are out there. So what we're going to do today is kind of two areas that we're going to focus on. One is how to run effective online meetings. There are a number of different platforms that are out there, whether it be Zoom, GoTo, WebEx, a host of others. And then we also are going to give you a demonstration of this virtual meeting room, which is this proprietary software that we have developed with our technology group that is customizable. You can access it at any time. You can use it on your PC or mobile device. And we've been using it on a number of projects on Long Island that Lou and Alan will get to in a moment. And it's been a really effective way of, you actually feel like you're in the meeting yourself, in the meeting room, and you can navigate and walk around the room and see different stations, provide public comment, enter into dialogue with professionals and so forth. So just to highlight, as I mentioned, over the last 6-7 months, we've actually been brought in by over 50 different assignments that we've had throughout VHB's footprint. Examples of them have included EIS scoping sessions with the Army Corps of Engineers and different federal agencies for development projects, environmental impact reviews. We hosted a Zoom meeting with FHWA, which had over 1,800 participants dialing in from all over the United States as well as overseas. We've run community workshops, which, just public information type workshops. A couple of weeks ago, we did a board meeting for the Rhode Island Airport Commission. We've held public hearings for the Metro Plan Orlando. And then specifically on Long Island, a number of municipalities, Brookhaven, Islip, Smithtown, and Southold, had brought us on to help facilitate and run extremely successful town council, planning board, and zoning board hearings. So what we put together is basically a 5-step process. And I think all 5 of these steps, they're sequential and they're extremely important. I think you need to do each and every one of them to run a successful virtual meeting. The first is just assessing your needs, understanding what type of meeting you're going to be having. Is it a meeting where you're going to be voting? Is it a meeting that you just want to educate the public? Is it a meeting that you're looking for public comment? And then step 2 is, once we understand the type of meeting and the number of participants that you're going to be having, is to choose the right platform. And we will get to this in a moment. There are a number of platforms out there. We have a preferred platform that we like to use, which we'll discuss with you. And step 3, and I would argue this is the most important, and it's absolutely critical. We tell our clients that you absolutely must run a dry run. Many of the participants and the people running these meetings are using the various platforms for the first time. And it's incredibly important to make sure that you have a couple of dry runs before you actually run the hearing or run the meeting itself, so that everyone becomes familiar with the programs, familiar with the technology, both the content and the technical aspects. And then step 4 is executing the meeting. And that can be everything from VHB helping, and we've done this, helping to provide technical backup and assistance, to actually facilitating the meeting and running the meeting itself. And then last is the post-meeting debrief, just sort of circling back with the people that ran the meeting to talk about what went well, what needed to be improved, so that the next time you run it, you're constantly improving upon it. So I'm going to turn it over now to Alan to go over the various platforms that are out there.
Thanks, Ken. And so by now, many of you have probably recognized a lot of these logos you're seeing on the screen. But back in February, I mean, a handful of us were probably familiar with probably Zoom, GoTo being GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting, Cisco WebEx, Microsoft Teams internally, although they've been doing a lot of feature improvement to catch up to some of the other vendors, and even things like Google Meet. These are all great solutions, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. But sometimes some of these platforms are not permitted inside of an organization for various IT rules or perceived security issues, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. So trying to figure out which one works best is kind of trying to, which one is your favorite kid? You're never going to say. But for us, we can operate on all these platforms, but we do have a preference, and that preference is Zoom, because the biggest advantage that we see in Zoom, there's actually two. The biggest is that it's actually a bifurcated platform. It's Zoom Meeting, which we're using here, which is great for when you want to have a nice, good, open kind of discussion. But sometimes when you're dealing with unknowns, like how crowds are going to react, Zoom Webinar is a far better solution for those kinds of meetings. And we'll give some examples of those coming up. It gives the host and co-host incredible granular control, permitting control to attendees in a stepwise fashion, so nothing ever gets out of hand. The other thing we like is the user interface. My kids are doing Zoom school right now. We also have Zoom family catch-up calls with grandparents. And so that kind of shows you how accessible the platform is, from the young to the old, and every level of tech savviness in between. Again, other tools have good and strengths and weaknesses, but again, we found that Zoom works well for us. And to touch upon that Zoom meeting issue, you may have heard of things like Zoom bombing or meeting hijacking, where people kind of share content inappropriately. Maybe they share their camera, or they just something subtle like renaming themselves, something you wouldn't want to say in front of other people. The value and benefit of using Zoom Webinar means you get that incredible control. And we're very happy to say that since we've been using Zoom Webinar, the number of times that we've been Zoom bombed is exactly 0. So we have that control. We can help clients, we can help people move their meetings along the process in a safe, efficient manner. So what I'd like to do is, we actually put together a short video. It is very short, I promise. It's like 85 seconds, just under a minute and a half. That kind of like compresses and amalgamates a couple different kind of successes or interesting things that we've learned along the way. And that's going to kind of tee up the middle portion of our presentation here. So if you can just sit back for about a minute and a half and kind of watch a few things here, in the bottom of the screen will kind of illustrate the things that we're trying to call out in these short segments. Before we get started, I just want to walk through the outline of the process for participating in this meeting, as I know it's new for some folks.
Brown to grant the application subject to the CNRs. Their second by Mr. Moriarty. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions, the application is granted. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the board, thank you. And thank you for continuing to operate during these less than optimal times. Other towns are suspending and canceling meetings, and you guys are still going along. So I really do appreciate it, and thank you to staff.
Thank you. Stay safe.
So first, we have a couple questions that came in the Q&A, and our panelists have been excellent at responding to those, but I would like to read those into the record because we have a couple folks on the phone who who won't benefit from seeing the Q&A. And then we have a couple hand raises, so we'll get to those in a moment. So just
You can interact a couple different ways. If you're on Zoom, the actual platform, looks like all of you are, we don't have any dial-ins. Down below, there's a hand raise icon, looks like someone's giving you a high five. You can do that. That sends a command to me that for later on when we're ready to do Q&A that you want to speak.
If you are attending by telephone, you can press *9 and that will act the same way. We'll see that you're raising your hand and let you know when you are able to speak.
Thanks. So with that, I want to hand it over to Lou to talk us through a little bit how we started approaching communities in New York and elsewhere, kind of how we've been helping them along the way. So Lou?
Sure, thanks, Alan. So yeah, virtual meetings on Long Island. It's a new and interesting initiative here. And I think what it started with for us, at least, is understanding the need. So for me, that was fairly easy. Before I joined VHB a few years ago, I spent about a decade working in local government on Long Island for various elected officials in various towns and counties. And I think during that time, one of my biggest takeaways was an understanding of the important role that really the public plays in the ongoing operation of government. And public engagement, if you don't sit back and think about it, it really impacts all facets of government, from advancing transformative projects to just the day-to-day daily operation of paving roads and picking up garbage. And absent of our ability to continue this engagement and communicate efficiently and effectively with the public, local government could be in real trouble when it comes to their budgets, jobs, and slowdown of economic development. So we took this really seriously and identified that need really early on. It was really February, early March. And we started thinking at VHB, what could we do to help our clients? And we started looking at, honestly, developing a solution, right? Developing a modern solution. So again, this was February, March. Zoom was not a household name. We were all just starting to adjust to this new normal. So we, at VHB, we took an integrated services approach to developing this solution. We took our applied tech team, we took our planning team, our state and local government team, and we came together to develop a solution that kind of took this technology and integrated it with best practices in public engagement and how these governments typically would try to hold these types of meetings. And our best practices, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, we quickly identified a number of things, from over defining and assigning roles to rehearsing dry runs, getting a really in-depth understanding of the features that are available and how we can customize them for our clients in any one of these platforms. We came up with various machinations and ways for handling Q&A, which is probably the thing that we customize the most for folks. And sharing content prior to the meeting or during the meeting. So just a number of best practices that we've kind of learned along the way. And that came to delivering and implementing change, right? So how do we get people to change their mindset after decades of becoming very comfortable with the way public in-person meetings are being held, right? So we had to get people, acclimated with this new technology. And a lot of folks who are on these boards or who might be trying to attend to speak, members of the public who might be trying to attend these meetings, they might not be, this might not be user-friendly for them. So we had to quickly come up with ways to make it more user-friendly and make it easy to understand so we could drive, implementation. We wanted to be flexible, right? We had to customize the experience and be able to ramp up very quickly, because when COVID hit and many governments had to shut down, they did not want to wait for somebody to come figure this out. They wanted to keep their next meeting that was already scheduled and already posted, keep it going. And so we had to come up with a solution very quickly. And we had to, have a few early successes here to really get people to buy in. And it really started with the Federal Highway in the Mid-Atlantic. VHB started doing work there. And based on that, we were able to put together these best practices and kind of implement it throughout the company's footprint. So, and we knew, from our experience, that there would be a lot of benefits if we could do this right? We know that we could limit that mob mentality that occurs in person when someone speaks out against the majority of people who are in the room. We know that we could encourage and organize more factual dialogue with members of the public, with applicants and the boards to help them make their decisions. And there are a lot of social justice benefits, and the things that are going on in our country now, it's really important that we're able to access everybody. So if you, as Ken mentioned earlier, if you can't get a babysitter, if you can't get off of work, a lot of these things are live streamed. You can go back, you can provide comments at a later time, and you can do it from the comfort of your home if you are attending in real time. So there's all these benefits, and most importantly, more public participation. And that's something we've demonstrated and seen over the last six months or so. So you can go to the next slide. So we'll start with just a couple case studies to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So we'll start with the zoning and planning boards. You know, you can see the list of things on the screen here as the challenges that we were kind of facing when we first started. And one of the first ones, and Alan and I kind of partnered on these all over Long Island. We worked with the town of Brookhaven, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the ISA Planning Board. So we're going to highlight those two for you as a start. And some of the challenges were, you know, we had members who wanted to still meet in person, and they were very skeptical of this new technology and the ability to, you know, engage with the public and be transparent and have the public buy into this. And we had others who still wanted to work remote and remain remote. We had meeting agendas that could be 40, 50 agenda items long and could be hours. And how would that work over a Zoom meeting, for example? There's obviously a huge need to coordinate all the different presenters. You know, if it's a zoning board of appeals, you might have 10 or 15 different attorneys, different applicants, members of the public who need to speak, who are used to signing up in a certain manner. How are we going to make that as normal as possible for both the board members and the public and the applicants? We need to be able to view plans. And this is one of the things, and Alan, I'm sure you'll touch on it. This is one of the things I think is actually better virtually than in person, when you're sharing content and everyone can see it in one place and you can annotate and et cetera. So Alan, I'm sure you'll talk about that. And people, there are a lot of, in Brookhaven and ISA, they were already live streaming. Brookhaven has a public access channel. Are we going to still be able to do that if we're using Zoom? Are we going to be able to live stream over YouTube? You know, and again, we had to jump right in. So, you know, unlike other municipalities, some of these towns, they didn't have a desire here to, you know, test the virtual meeting software with a small, easy meeting that, you know, didn't have a lot of agenda items. We had to jump right in and help them. They had, you know, things that were scheduled, and they had, you know, planning applications and fees that had to come in, and we had to keep them operating. So there was a lot of opportunities associated with this as well. It's not all difficult things. So in Brookhaven, for example, we had a very, very engaged IT team. So they were, I can't say enough about the folks over there at the town. They really kept this going. They were able to make sure that they were organizing everybody in town hall, making sure they had the information, making sure everyone had the right software and the right hardware to be able to do this appropriately and be professional. And we had significant support from the town attorney's office. So they were able to, you know, really help, you know, manage the meeting the day of, monitor the Q&A, you know, make sure applicants, they knew the applicants in advance, and were they all there? Were they present in the participants list? So all these different things. At ISIP, we had a very strong chairman who really ended up buying in and leading. Can't say enough about there on the ISA planning board. And again, I think that what we tried to do with VHB is create this partnership between, you know, both towns and VHB. It wasn't VHB being hired to just turn on Zoom and make sure it goes smooth. We walked them through every step of the process, you know, beginning to end, before the meeting, after the meeting. So, Alan, why don't I turn over to you? We talk a little about how we customize the experience for ISIP and Brookhaven.
Sure. So just a couple of things to add on to what you were saying, Lou. In terms of that partnership, it was really great because the idea all along, for example, for Brookhaven, wasn't for VHB to be their tech solution partner, and you know, until the end of time. The idea was they wanted to do it on their own. So what we did is kind of like teaching the kid how to ride a bike. We put the training wheels on. We issued out some URLs under our VHB domain, and they were kind of along for the ride. And then we kind of did a few meetings together where we hosted, but then they ran it, and then we kind of shadowed them. And then lo and behold, enough, you know, after a few meetings, it was almost like, okay, there you go. If the kid turns around and, you know, the parent's not there riding the holding the seat anymore. And that was the idea. And we engaged with them a little bit afterwards for some email exchanges, for some tech support. But the idea is they're often doing it themselves, and that's a great success. A couple of technologies-based solutions we did is we had several hearings one night. I think it was 27 one night. It was either Brookhaven or Islip, and we had a lot of applicants coming in, and that attendee list grows, and it was pretty challenging to figure out who was what. So we came up with something just simple as renaming them to 01A and then John Smith. So they're the applicant for item 1, or they're the commenter on item 2, so 02C, whatever. So whenever the names come up, because Zoom tends to alphabetically sort the names in the list, we were very easily could identify the names, bring them across, let them speak, or bring them across as a panelist to present, and just very easily move them in and out of the meeting. And that strong partnership with the town attorney let us do that in quick, rapid fashion. Another thing is that I think it's in ISLIP, the way they would in pre-pandemic times to register to speak, they'd have to fill out a yellow form, a yellow card. And so we're trying to figure out how could we mimic that. So we talked about that in advance. They let us know what some of their challenges were, and we were able to rise to the occasion to try to mimic that the best way that we possibly could. And the last piece is with that live streaming, having a strong partnership with the IT teams was, oh, you guys live stream right now? Great, let's connect up in advance. Let's figure out how to do the passing of the URLs and the API keys and all that fancy tech stuff to make sure they are being able to push out these meetings onto the live stream so people could connect in through Zoom. They could watch it on live stream. They could dial in. They could raise their hands. They could do all kinds of things to bring this meeting to as many people as possible.
That's great, Alan. So why don't we go to the next slide? This is case study economic development. So what does that mean? As I said earlier, virtual meetings are not just for the nuts and bolts of everyday operations of government, planning board, zoning board, town board meetings. It can also be to handle some of those things that might be more controversial that you'd be used to doing in person, seeing a large turnout. And, moving forward, things that are still transformative that, honestly, we need to see being moved forward during this time, probably more so than ever. So we commend the town of Smithtown. We worked with them. They're doing an initiative right now to rebrand the Hauppauge Industrial Park into a Hauppauge Innovation Park. And to do that, they, after following, years of studies, they were going to, on their own motion, change the zoning in areas of the park to allow for residential use for the first time in the industrial park. So, normally this would be done, it would be in person in normal times. And you would expect for something like this a large turnout and for folks to come out with their concerns or their things that they're supportive of. And for us, and kudos to the town for doing it, they wanted to move forward and they didn't want to put, a stop into the process here that had been going on for so long and right towards that end piece, the biggest piece of this. So, we knew that when we got brought on to run this meeting that, it would be a challenge because this is a one and done. So unlike some of the other meetings that we've supported, you do one, you get a couple lessons learned, we go back, we fix anything that maybe worked or didn't work, whatever it might be. This was going to be a one and done and we had to execute it perfectly because the topic had the potential to be controversial. And we didn't want the public to be able to say to the town, hey, you should have waited until we were back in person because this just didn't work. So we spent a lot of time working with the town behind the scenes. We were obviously concerned because of the high profile nature of the agenda that there could be a really high level participation. Some people using computers, some maybe using their telephone or their mobile device. And we were going to have to manage that in real time. And we were still going to have to live stream, et cetera, everything that they're doing today. So we came up with a number of different ways, right, Alan, to work through the Q&A, and you'll talk about that more. Yeah. And one of the other challenges we had was in this particular town, they have a very strict speaking limit, and they hold to a 3-minute limit. So how were we going to manage that over Zoom? So again, this is an opportunity. It's a long-term economic development initiative, and it's for the virtual meetings give us the opportunity and the town the opportunity to keep these things moving. So Alan, I'll turn it back to you to talk about how we customize the experience on this one.
Sure. I'll just touch upon maybe two or three very quick things that were particularly interesting about this project. Because of so many people wanting to offer up comment, using the Zoom webinar format really helped us out, because if you were pre-COVID times, we're sitting in the room and someone speaks up and someone could say, yeah, and you kind of sit with your faction or your group or your mob. And we kind of try to almost democratize the fact that we can only have one microphone open at a time. So we're able to very limit the fact that we didn't have a chorus of angry voices or even a chorus of supportive voices coming in at once. We're able just to say one person at a time gets to speak and just go down that list. And we were able to enforce that 3-minute speaking rule that they had pre-Zoom by quite simply, I would share my screen, I pulled up a 3-minute timer and I would just put it up there. And it wasn't red or glaring in the screen. It's just someone would start to speak. They'd see their time tick down. And honestly, just seeing it there on the screen no one went over. I think we got to like 4 seconds and someone was wrapping up their last point. They might have gone to 3 minutes and 1 second, but by and large, they stuck to the 3 minutes. Great, thank you very much. Lower the hand, go to the next name, lather, rinse, repeat. And we just went down the whole list of all the comments. So that countdown timer that was there, not overly glaring in your face, and the one open mic at a time really helped us get through that process.
Thanks, Alan. So if we go to the next slide. So in addition to the towns and the municipalities that we've been supporting, there are lots of other applications for virtual meetings. And we've done some work with advocacy groups and not-for-profits across the region. One that comes to mind, Alan and I worked with the Long Island Regional Planning Council. And last night, Alan, I think you ran the Suffolk County Village Officials Association meeting. Some people might have been on participating there too. And I think we have an energy client we're helping tonight. So, very different challenges than government might face. For this particular one, I'll use the LIRPC as an example. Very different format, right? So this is much more presentation based. You might have a number of switching of content over the course of the event. So there'd be different people who need to control different shared screens. Just a completely different level of tech savviness with all these different people. So we had to control all that and make sure it worked very smoothly. So why don't we quickly breeze through that for an effort of time, and we can get to the virtual meeting room.
Great. All right, so let me stop sharing here, Lou, and just go to the next slide then. Or no, actually, are we going to the virtual meeting room? We're going to talk about the lessons.
Yeah, just do the lessons quick, and then we'll.
Okay. So Ken, if you want
to quickly, to wrap up, kind of what we've learned as a result of 7 months of doing this. I think what we found first off is that, there are various levels of sophistication within local government. Some municipalities have great IT departments and staff are very familiar with Zoom and the various platforms. Others not so much. So there's a range of levels of sophistication. I can't stress again the importance of rehearsing and running mock meetings to make sure everyone knows how to run the platform. That tech rehearsals are just as important as the content rehearsals. You need to make sure, partnering with Alan, I've learned a lot on the tech side from Alan. Alan's learned a lot from me as a planner on the content side. So I think that marriage between tech and content is extremely important. And making sure you clearly define and assign roles, who's the host, who's the panelist, who's the participant. You want to make sure that, checking your internet connection beforehand. We've worked in many communities in the Mid-Atlantic in particular that don't have good internet connection, and making sure that that's important. Logging in early. I joked ahead of time on this that we just, as a matter of record, we dial in good 15, 20 minutes before every Zoom call, just to make sure that everything is working properly. Checking your video cameras, making sure that you've got the participants' names identified, knowing how to share and unshare content, asking participants to submit their questions to a moderator ahead of time using the Q&A and chat and email function as well. And then lastly, I think it's extremely important to be deliberate. Doing Zoom meetings and talking through your computer, you need to speak slower than normal, pause, allow time for questions. And Lou mentioned this earlier, we found that exhibits, whether they be photographs or plans or renderings, are actually easier to view in a virtual setting than it is in person, because you can zoom in to the actual graphic itself. One thing that we recommend is to reduce the text and detail to provide more of a focus on the presenter and being able to zoom in on the actual graphic itself, but it works a lot better virtually than it does in person. So I think we're going to turn it now to just to wrap up, this is kind of the dessert of our presentation, is to give you a demo of the virtual meeting room that we've developed.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. This is the virtual meeting room we put together for downtown Baldwin. We're the actually consultants to New York State for the Baldwin Downtown Revitalization Initiative. And this was just a few weeks ago. And what's great about this is you are able to allow the community at large to come in and to feel like they're in the actual room. And you're able to get their feedback. So Alan, I'll turn it over to you to demo and kind of explain how we did that using this room.
Great, thanks, Lou. So you can see here that we're in this multi dimensional environment. It looks like it's bricks and mortar because that's the design we have, but frankly, we can do different kinds of designs. But the idea was, imagine the kind of meeting where you want to give people a chance to consume a bunch of information up front before you move into what we have here on this door along the wall, this live discussion session. So this is an example of partnering with some other IT folks within our organization to design this room after hearing the needs, wants, and desires from our client, and then pairing it up with a Zoom webinar where we're going to have a big attendance and people can actually jump into the Zoom webinar from this door here and then go participate in that. And then when they're done, they can come back into this room and consume the content at their own pace. And when I say consume the content, it could be something like where we have a handful of slides that we turn into JPEG images and people can kind of swipe through and then check it out. Oh, hold on, I want to go back and take a look at that. I didn't get to see that. Oh, that's great. And it isn't just slides. They can do things like pull up, I said more slides. They can pull up things like a survey where we can ask simple checkbox answers, or we can pull up an interactive map where they can look at things, or we can have an ARC map that runs. And so the interesting thing about this, we can support videos, we can support PDFs, we can support links out to other websites. So essentially, as long as it's a piece of clickable digital content, we can support it in this room. And what's great is like, this is a really interesting environment. And this is that, 2-level bricks with windows coming through, but we have lots of other choices here. So for example, one example I want to show is we can support something that's where you might want to offer up something where people can consume content, but then let's say you have some documents you want them to take back with them. So in this particular example in Florida, we have this map here, and we have a document table where there's a 230 something page EIS that if they want to download and take it with it, they can. And the great thing is everything that's within this environment is inherently clickable. So we can track what they do and where they're doing it. We can see what's of particular interest and what maybe isn't. Another one, just to show you, just take some examples of what these things look like, is I can show you one. These are all inside, but we can even do things that are outside. So this is an example where we've got a 3D image from one of our drones. And you can actually set up checkpoints along this bridge if you like. So that your meeting doesn't have to even be within a meeting room. You can make it outside for fun to kind of give a bit of a different experience. But let's say, for example, you're doing a golf course. You could actually have a golf course layout and have different stations at different holes to kind of consume the information that way. You can even actually have something a little more engaging, a little more interesting, like maybe perhaps a lounge where you can actually have people in a mimicked social environment.
Welcome to the VHB Lounge for planners like you and me.
I'm not sure if you guys
come on in and get comfortable,
but we can actually support audio. And then of course, one last example before I show you some stats, because I'm an engineer, I'm a nerd guy, is that we can show things that are interesting, like something that's a little more low profile, where it might not be as intense from a graphics perspective, like that one. This was a case that Ken was alluding to a moment ago for a rural Virginia, where we thought bandwidth might be an issue. So what we did was we prepared a case where it was a kind of a Spartanly designed room, not a lot of graphics, not a lot of intensive things.
Hello, and welcome to the virtual public scoping meeting for the proposed expansion of the Southeastern Public Service Authority.
As people clicked on a sign, they would actually get some annotation. And so the other thing about that, I talked about some metrics, is we have the ability to see what people are doing. So a great example here. So Baldwin went live on September 16th. You can see this spike here, but we also have another one here, the 25th, and another one here in the 30th. When you have a pre-COVID, we have a room where you open the doors up from 6 to 8 and then you close. That's it. That's the limit of the engagement. Maybe a couple follow-up emails. Here, people can consume things. We can see how busy it was, what they were clicking on, what they were doing, and to check out a whole host of options. On this one here, we can see where they're coming from. So no surprise here, this big fat part of the red circle is a direct link. That's because we gave it to them. But if you scroll down and look in the list, you can see that some people came here from Facebook. Some people came here from mobile Facebook, which I'll talk about in just one moment. And that's, I promise, it's the last thing I'll say. We can also look at other things as well. So the idea is that we get incredible amount of analytics. This can be served up on mobile devices, desktop devices like Windows and Mac, as well as things like mobile phone. We have about 25% of people here coming from a mobile device because this content is easily served up on desktop and mobile as well. So with that, I'm going to pause and I think yield a bit back to, I think, the rest of the floor here. I think that's it for That's it until we can now take some Q&A.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And as someone who had to switch sort of abruptly to teaching online, and now I've been teaching online for, 6 months, yeah, it was a hard transition. And then you start to appreciate the things that you can do online that you couldn't do in the classroom. So, you know, there are some trade-offs, but in some ways, there's an advantage, I think, to teaching online. And so before I open it up for Q&A, I do have our last CLE code that I would like to give out. And I know we have a slide of it as well. So the last CLE code is zone. Zone. And we did get one question in the chat about the New York State requirements, the New York State training requirements. And in a week or two, we will have certificates of attendance posted in the same folder as the other materials for this conference, and you'll be able to go in and find your name and you can download your own certificate. So that's the plan for that. So with that, I really would like to turn to some Q&A, and I know we have a lot of you know, zoning and planning officials here that are probably trying to get their arms around this technology. So I really want to open it up to everyone to post their questions in the chat. One of the questions that I've gotten is, you know, the technology is amazing. And for someone that is really familiar with iPads and technology and, you know, able to navigate these types of platforms, the amount of information that you can get is fantastic. But I'm wondering about, you know, people who don't have as much experience, who don't spend, you know, 10 hours on their screens a day, or who are not as technologically savvy. How are those people reacting? Are you getting sort of a range of responses?
Yeah, Alan, you want to take it? Yeah, I'll start. From two aspects. One, from that virtual meeting room that we just left, we have ways of providing audio overlays and pop-ups that say, here to look around. You can pan left and right by clicking and dragging. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, and we can add kind of audio instructions at different stations to kind of guide people along the way. In the Zoom rooms, not only are we just a provider of a URL and a technology, we help guide and facilitate the discussion. So when we take people off mute, if they're having a hard time, we coach them how to do that. Oh, if they are sharing video, but they're not sure, we kind of walk them through that, because at the end of the day, we want our clients to be successful to have that meeting. So we try to guide everyone along if they're having problems. And if they're not, we kind of step back and don't do anything. Lou, did you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I noticed in a lot of the public meetings are folks who wouldn't have attended in person are now able to just call in using their phone, and you can actually raise your hand over the phone using *9. So, and it shows up in no differently to us other than the last 4 numbers of their phone come up in the participant list. So we're able to, this is the exact example as Alan was saying, we would say, you know, we have somebody, looks like last 4 digits of your number are whatever they are. We're going to unmute your mic for you. The floor is yours. If they have any trouble, we guide them through that. And then they're able to speak. So you're actually seeing that additional level of ease of participation for folks who may not be technically savvy or who can't come out in person.
Yeah, I think that's actually a big benefit of doing these things online, even for these types of programs, is, you know, there's a lot more accessibility and you don't have to carve out as much time from your schedule. So I agree. I think that that's a big advantage. One of the questions in the chat is, do you find any particular platform better for online conferences or workshops with breakout sessions?
Yeah, Alan, go ahead. I mean, I know
sure. Yeah, so we know that, so WebEx and GoTo and all these things can do meetings and they can do webinars. Zoom, I think it's probably cornered the market on that breakout room technology, and that's great. But just one thing to keep in mind, that's with the Zoom meeting to do breakouts, which is really great. And if you've got a trusted group of people that you want to do those kinds of things, when you want to have kind of a open plenary session, this is what we're doing tonight and we did last night for one of our energy clients, is we have this big plenary session and then we want to break out into focused discussion areas, but still we don't know how many people are going to attend. It could be upwards of hundreds and 200s. So we're actually running a webinar with then spurs of webinars to kind of keep that control. So there's just different things you can do, but for us, Zoom is the platform that we pick if we have a choice in the matter.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to add to that?
No, you said it. I love Zoom webinar. It's my favorite. I'll take it from the perspective of, I've been in government for so long. And what's really great about webinar is that ability to kind of put a wall between the panelists, who are usually your town board members, and the public and those participants, because it keeps it very organized and it makes it easier for the decision makers, the folks who are the town board members, the council people, to listen to each person individually, have that dialogue, thank them, and move on to the next person. And you see these meetings running so efficiently. You're seeing more people able to participate, and so it's just been a win-win. But that webinar makes it, almost Zoom bomb proof, as Alan said earlier. People can't sign on in the middle, with their video on, holding their dog and chewing on whatever they're chewing on, and so it makes it a much more professional presentation.
Thank you. And I think this is probably going to be our last question, but I know you said, that there are opportunities, and I just wonder, given, I guess, the success of the online format, do you think that this is going to be a permanent change going forward? Do you think, will the governor, will the state allow, local meetings to continue being conducted this way? Or do you think we'll revert back to in-person meetings, kind of after
Now,
this?
I'll take this one, because I've given this a lot of thought. I mean, I think that, we've learned so much in so many different areas of with this pandemic. I mean, with people, we've learned about working from home. I think that going, once the pandemic leaves, I think we're going to be, we've demonstrated that people can work from home, more than they were working from home before. And I do think that the virtual meetings will be here to stay in some fashion going forward. I mean, I think that yes, we will be back to being in offices and having in-person meetings. But I think, we've demonstrated that virtual meetings can be an effective way of doing public engagement, public outreach, and running effective meetings. And it will be interesting to see how the governors react, post-pandemic, in terms of whether or not virtual meetings become allowable as a effective way of running, a decision-making meeting. I think that they will in some fashion going forward, because it is an effective way of doing it, and the level of public engagement and participation, and also equity as well, in terms of allowing people that would not normally be able to participate in a virtual setting. So I think we're going to see it going forward in some fashion.
Okay, that's great. So I think we are out of time. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn to say, oh, look at that. I was just going to say, I'm sure that the participants can reach out to you if they have additional questions, and you beat me to it. You posted it in the chat. So
one thing I would say is that we did publish a viewpoints, kind of a white paper on how to run effective virtual meetings, and we can provide a link to that if folks don't already have it, which has much of what we've talked about today, and then more info as well.
That would be fantastic, and we can provide it with the conference materials from today, so everyone can have access. That would be great. Thank you. So I just want to thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists, and this was a fascinating way to end it. I think I'm going to walk away with a lot of ideas about running virtual meetings in classrooms, and I really appreciate it. And again, I want to thank all of the panelists for participating, for coming out, and all of the audience members. And with that, I'm going to end the meeting, and I hope we'll see you back again soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.